with Arnold Dean. Hot talk, great guests. Weeknights at 6:15 from WTIC, Hartford.
CBC Radio, Canada's public broadcaster.
Try Carter's Little Liver Pill. Good advice.
Good mornings only on KCMO Kansas City. It's 8 o'clock.
When you're tuned to CDS Radio.
This is the DX Central from the Static Podcast.
From Studio B of the North Shore Studios in Mandeville, Louisiana.
And welcome to another episode of the DX Central from the Static Podcast. I'm your host, Lloyd Van Horn, here in Studio B today of our North Shore Studios, where we have a special treat for you on this edition of the podcast. A couple years back, we started a series called DXC One-on-One, where we were interviewing prominent members of the DX community. And we've had a couple of those interviews go out. And I now have brought those into the podcast because I think they work better from an audio perspective than video. And so we did the one in October. We released the podcast episode with our interview with Bryce Foster and Nick Langan from the VHF DX podcast that we did at the end of season 5, DX Central Live. So we've already released that, which was a fantastic interview talking about FMDX. We also had an interview we did back in 2021. Fall of 2021, season 2 premiere. Our premiere of season 2 of DX Central Live. Think about that. We just launched season 6. From season 2, our premiere, we did an interview with Wayne Heinen from the National Radio Club. Now, we played a couple of snippets in that interview, or that episode of DXC Live, of that interview. We did 2 segments, but it wasn't the entirety of the interview. So there's more there that we haven't released. We will be doing that one soon. But today, what we're going to release is an interview that nobody has heard. We did this one in September of 2022. It was originally going to be our premiere of season 3 of DX Central Live. We were going to do this interview, but we ended up the video files didn't work, and we lost some of this access to some of the stuff that we had, so we had to scrap it. But now that we're doing the podcast, I actually found the audio file. And so for the very first time, we present to you the unreleased interview with Bruce Portzer. Bruce is the president of the IRCA, the International Radio Club of America. And Bruce is a very experienced DXer, more than 60 years in the hobby. He lives up in the Pacific Northwest, and we talk a bit about some of the unique opportunities and challenges that his location brings to AMDX. Also, some of his approaches to how he DXs, his embrace of the SDR technology that's available to us now, and some of the different options that are out there for us to DX with. We talk a bit about his past in DXing as well, what got him into it, favorite radios, favorite catches, things like that. So a lot of good information in this interview. Now, keep in mind, it was recorded back in September of 2022. So it's now a couple of years old, but I still think there is a ton of really good information and just good conversation here with Bruce.
Bringing you some of the biggest names in the DX community. This is DXC One-on-One.
And we have Bruce Portzer from the International Radio Club of America joining us. Bruce, thank you so much for being here on DXC One-on-One. We really appreciate your time.
It's my pleasure.
And so Bruce is with the IRCA, the International Radio Club of America, one of the two main DX clubs, actually the 2 DX clubs in North America, the United States. Of course, there's some others around the world, but those are our 2 here in the U.S. And tell us a little bit about the IRCA, Bruce, kind of the history behind the IRCA and who can join and what is in store for members when they join into the IRCA.
Okay, well, the IRCA was founded in 1964 as a result of some internal issues that NRC had at the time, National Radio Club, which was the oldest of the 2 medium wave clubs. And make a long story short, we ended up with 2 DX clubs instead of 1, which I think has probably fostered a good spirit of competition over the years. Club has members from all over the world. mostly a lot of people in the western U.S., but all parts of the U.S. and Canada. Current membership is about 400. And it's devoted almost exclusively to medium wave DX. We covered tropical bands a little bit as well, but mostly medium wave DX, both domestic and foreign.
And I know there are some publications as well that are available for DXers through IRCA. We talk a lot here at DX Central about the Mexican log. So basically, a lot of folks are familiar with like the NRC's AM radio log. This is the same thing, but for stations from Mexico. Huge resource. I know Tim Hall works diligently putting that together and has a lot of information about Mexican stations down there. What are some of the other publications that DXers can get a hold of from the IRCA?
We have another one called the TIS HAR list, which is Travelers Information Stations and Highway Advisory Radio, which are those little 10-watt transmitters that operate on 530 and 1610 and various other frequencies that are basically for road information and national and scenery at national parks, road closures, construction, things like that. So we have a directory of those just so people have a fighting chance of figuring out who some of them are. They're pretty hard to hear just because of the low power.
Yeah, that was actually back in the 90s when I first started DXing on AM. TIS stations were one of those things I kind of zeroed in on. I really enjoyed. I find it a lot harder these days to hear TIS stations than it used to be. I remember in North Carolina hearing stuff from Illinois and Kentucky and elsewhere back on 1610 when it was just pretty much the Caribbean Beacon was all you had, right? Now I don't feel like I don't hear them as often. I have one right in my backyard basically, but other than that, I haven't heard a lot of them. So it's something I need to spend some more time doing on the radio, is trying to get some more TIS HAR stations, and that would be a list that I would definitely want to make sure that I have in my disposal. I know another one that you guys offer, the Sunset Sunrise Maps.
Right.
That's a tool that I have. Actually, I have in my binder over here, in my log binder. I have every month, and I use those to kind of predict, right, either sunrise or sunset time frames, depending on what month it is of the year. When can I expect, to try to go after this particular area? Like maybe there's a station I'm trying to target, right? Either sunrise or sunset. That helps me kind of plan that out. Say, okay, April is going to be a good time for that one, and in May I should be able to get this one over here in this state, and so forth. So that's another one I always recommend to DXers to check out, the sunrise, sunset maps. Let's talk a bit about you as a DXer as well, Bruce. How long have you been in the DX hobby?
Since 1964, whatever that works out to be about. It started when I was 12, so about 60 years almost. I got my interest in radio is probably genetic, because my dad was a ham and my mother used to listen to stations like WLS and WWVA when she was growing up in southeastern Pennsylvania. So I guess it just kind of was natural that I should end up being an AMDXer. Yeah,
I know that feeling.
Yeah. Yeah, well, yeah, you too, for sure. Yeah. But I officially got interested in radio, DXing, in about 1964, March. There was a big earthquake in the state of Alaska, and I somehow got the idea that I could probably find out more about the earthquake if I could tune in an Alaska station. Well, I didn't have any real good lists of stations at the time, so I just started tuning around aimlessly, and never did hear Alaska that night, but I heard CFRN in Edmonton, Alberta, which is my first DX sketch.
Oh, there you go.
And CBK in Regina, Saskatchewan, and KFBK Sacramento, and KEX Portland, and KGA Spokane, and a bunch of the fairly easy stations. It got me started.
What was your first radio?
My first radio was an Airline table radio. I think that was the house brand for Montgomery Ward, probably built in about the 1940s. And it was pretty good. It's sensitive, kind of funky looking, like a lot of those old radios are. I still have it somewhere in my basement.
Oh, lucky. There you go. Nice.
Yeah. And then after that, I graduated to a Hallicrafter's S40 that my parents had. Was sitting in the kitchen by the kitchen table and sometimes getting used to listen to various things, but my parents were impressed by my interest in radio, so they moved it to my bedroom, and I had to start listening to AM and shortwave on it. It was pretty good radio.
Yeah, I started out. I mean, I always say my first DX catch was on a clock radio, but my first DX rig that I had was a Panasonic RF3100. And last year for the holidays, Mom and Dad came down to Louisiana and brought the Panasonic. So to have that back it's not in super great working condition right now. Needs a little work, but to have that radio still means a lot to me. To be able to still have my first real DX rig that I used is something pretty special. So I'm really glad that you still have yours. What are you DXing on now?
I've got two SDR receivers, a Perseus and a ELAD FDM2, and they're both pretty good. I've been using the Perseus mostly lately just because the Jaguar software is pretty awesome.
Yeah, it is. Let's talk a bit about that. So, obviously you've got some experience in the seat. DXing since the 60s, and mine started in the 90s, so not as long, but still from an era pre kind of SDR. I famously, I'm a big advocate of the SDR technology, and it sounds like you are as well. But what has that done for you as a DXer? The ability to use these SDRs and have that entire bandwidth there. What has that done for you as a DXer? What difference has that made?
How should I put it? I think there are things in life that you'd like to be able to do over again where you made some minor mistake and you think you can improve upon it. Well, you can do that with an SDR for DXing. Particularly at the top of the hour, if you're on the wrong frequency and you don't hear anything good, you can try again at a different frequency at the same top of the hour. So, and also a lot of my really good DX has been going on DXpeditions out next to the ocean, where a group of us will go out and put up a beverage or a decaz or some other fancy antenna and listen for down under stations or Asian stations. And there have been a lot of stations, basically what you can do is sit there and record the whole AM band for the whole morning and then go home and play back several days of listening at your leisure over a period of probably several weeks. You can hear some amazing stuff when you start digging into some of the channels that you wouldn't normally have tried.
I'm a night owl guy. I usually stay up a little later and don't get up as early. So Sunrise DX was always kind of my weakness. I knew there was great stuff there that it was waiting for me, but getting up and actually doing it was a whole other thing. Thank goodness for SDRs, because now that's no longer a problem for me. So, talk about AM. Do you also do FMDX as well?
I've never had much success with FMDX here in Seattle. It's pretty difficult to hear anything. For one thing, it's a pretty crowded FM dial, and being kind of in the northwest corner of the country, there's not much to hear to the north of us once you get past Vancouver, and to the west of us there's the Pacific Ocean, so the only FMDX you can get would be to the south and east, and most of the transmitter sites for the FM stations in Seattle are located on a mountain southeast of my house, so I haven't had much luck with FM. I had a little bit of luck with TV DX a long time ago, but haven't. Didn't really do much of that.
So when it comes to AM, I feel like a lot of DXers have their thing, right? That they it's like their thing to DX. Like I love DXing Latin America. What's your favorite thing on AM to DX?
Probably Trans-Pacific DX.
Yeah.
I kind of got interested in domestic DXing again a couple of years ago after several years' absence from that side of the hobby, and I end up SDR recording the entire AM band almost every night, and then just spot checking it to see if there's anything interesting in the next morning. Mm-hmm. That's kind of my at-home activity between the expeditions.
I have dabbled a little bit in the transoceanic stuff, right? When I was in Charleston, I did a little bit of the transatlantic. Wasn't hugely successful. Didn't, you see some of these guys like Mark and Bruce, some of the ones up in Allen up in the Northeast, they're just hearing amazing things. But I dabbled. As a person who does and has some good experience, some really great experience actually, on the Trans-Pacific side of things, what advice would you have for someone maybe either on the West Coast or even maybe someone a little further inland who is looking to do Trans-Pacific DX? What's some advice you would have for some of us who want to start looking in that direction and trying to see what we can hear?
Your best bet is to listen around sunrise. That's when they tend. There's a little bit of an enhancement for some reason at sunrise for Asian stations, or down unders. Either one will. It's kind of similar process, whatever it is. Kind of check the reports that you read in the bulletins to get an idea as to which are the most easily and likely heard stations. I mean, for Asia, the Koreans on 972 and 1566 are about the strongest, and there's some in Japan some high-powered NHK stations that may go off the air in a couple of years based on the government's plans right now. But until then, you've got stations with a couple hundred kilowatts in Japan on 594, 693, and 774, 828, 747 that are all good bets. Down under, Australia, I think the one on the ABC station on 1548 is the easiest Australian for me. New Zealand, 1503 or 657, and Tonga on 1017 is another good bet. So those are the most likely to hear stations. You just have to be really patient, try and use directional antennas, and you're probably better off using an SDR to record the band and play it back later, like I do.
Mm-hmm. Looking for those, looking for the signals on the waterfall to even see if you're even getting anything, right?
Yeah,
instead of spending hours and hours listening.
Yeah, if you're inland, you're hearing something that's pretty weak. But I know there are some people in the upper Midwest, like Tim Trump and a couple of others who were able to hear some of these stations. And back in the bottom of the sunspot cycle, some of the Japanese stations were heard in the Northeast. I think a guy in Montreal heard one of them.
So I see you got some stuff there with you behind you here on the camera shot. What's your shack setup like? What do you have there kind of at your disposal in addition to the SDRs?
I've got two laptops. One I use mainly for recording with Jaguar, and the other I use for all the other things like email and word processing and spreadsheets and stuff. I've got. I don't have you beat on monitors, but I've got two external monitors for the second laptop, so that's a good start, I guess. Other than that, I've got what else? I've got a Teammate 2 that I use with the ELAD. I just recently bought a an ICOM 7300 ham transceiver, but haven't done much with it yet. I've only had it for a few weeks, so I'll work that into the schedule at some point. I've got a couple of phasing units for my 2 antennas, and what else is here? The Perseus, the ALAD, and then off in the far end of the bench there, it's a Drake R8A that I haven't used in a long time, but it was my main receiver for a long time.
Such a great radio.
Yeah.
Such a good one. So we talked a bit about this recently here with some of the videos we've been producing. What's your logbook of preference? Paper log, digital log, online? What are you using?
I keep a logbook I just use an Excel spreadsheet for everything I've heard. These days I have 2 separate logs, one of which I've heard at home, stations I've heard at home, and the other is the stations I've heard on DXpeditions somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, either Washington, Oregon, or British Columbia. That's kind of goes back to a long time, but it's kind of a separate activity pretty much.
So let's talk about that, because that's something that I've always been pretty interested in is taking my DX outdoors and being portable. So obviously it's changed a lot with the advent of SDRs. Used to it's a much different process to set up a DXpedition, but now with SDRs and laptops and things like that. Talk a bit about what that experience is like getting something started. Let's say we have a random person watching the interview here, and they want to kind of go out and do some portable DX. What recommendations or what advice would you give them?
There's all sorts of possibilities. One, just keeping a portable AM, portable radio out to a quiet spot in a park or a campground or a cabin out in the woods somewhere, or just wherever it's a good quiet spot to listen. You don't need a whole lot to get started, and you can hear a lot of good stuff that way if your expertise is kind of limited and your radio budget is limited. The more elaborate setups, you can set up a whole series of antennas pointing in different directions and have a way of switching them, and if there's a group of people, you need a multi-coupler or a splitter to feed the signal to a separate everybody's receivers. So it's the setting it up is it can get pretty elaborate. The antennas kind of depends on how much space you have. Beverage antennas are one possibility if you have the space. They can go on for anywhere from 500 feet to upwards of half a mile of wire, just pointing where you want to hear it, whatever you want to hear. Or you can use something like a DCAS antenna, which is a lot smaller. It's about 20 feet tall and 160 feet long, and those work quite well.
Big fan. Big fan of the CASs.
Yeah. They take a while to set up, though, I can assure you.
Yeah, I did one. I did a little, I'll call it DXpedition, to Outer Banks, February of last year, and did a DCAS setup. Ended up having to cut it and just doing a 70-foot regular CAS. We had some power lines nearby, and it was right there on the beach, so the electrical noise was surprisingly bad. I didn't think it would be that bad, but apparently there was a lot of corrosion in the lines and things like that, so it was pretty rough. I ended up having to actually take my little AirSpy SDR and a portable magnetic loop down. I had a Sony ICF 2010, found a quiet spot on the beach where there was no noise finally, set up my SDR, my loop right there, and just recorded sunrise and sunset. I'm still going through those recordings, but it was a lot of fun. And so I encourage, if you're watching this interview with Bruce here, I encourage you to definitely take your DX outdoors wherever you can. Like Bruce said, if it's a portable radio, if you have the ability to bring an SDR and an antenna with you, just getting out, getting away from noise, getting out in nature is a lot of fun. So something I've always really enjoyed doing. Speaking of antennas, what are you using now at your home shack?
My home shack, I've got, it's kind of hard to describe, but it's basically two small CAS antennas, about 40 feet long and 10 feet high, that are across at more or less at right angles. So they have kind of a shared apex. And usually one point's northeast and one point southeast. Right now I've got it for the TP season, so one point's northwest instead of southeast. And it seems to work out quite well. I've been hearing a lot of TPs, Asians, around sunrise lately. And it also allows me to hear, pointing one southeast and one northeast allows me to hear the high latitude stuff to the east of me when it's coming in, or if there's auroral conditions or conditions that go to the south, I can use the southeast antenna to pick up stuff from California or Arizona or Texas or wherever it's coming in from, Mexico sometimes.
Oh, it's really, I was surprised when I did my first CAS. It was 12 by 48, and I was blown away by how well that little guy worked. This is a little 48-foot, 12-foot, had a painter's pole for the apex, and that, I mean, I got Ecuador, I got Peru for the first time on that one from when I was in Charleston. Now I have two 22 by 70s, and they work amazing, and I've got Vactrals and all that, so it's gotten a lot more sophisticated now, but that CAS is just still the directionality, the amount of gain you get. I'm using the Wellbrook preamp. It makes such a huge difference in the DX, so I'm a big fan. Yeah. So with Bruce Portzer from the International Radio Club of America, the IRCA, and we're talking about DX, AMDX, we're talking about the IRCA. Let's get into our 10 questions segment. And so this is the part where we kind of ask everyone the same questions and try to help maybe some other newer DXers out here and kind of getting an idea of kind of what's involved in DX and what to expect. So number one of the first ones I always like to kind of get started with on this one is, how has DX enriched your life?
I guess it kind of helped me. I like playing with radio so much as a teenager that I ended up getting an electrical engineering degree when I was in college, and that kind of formed my work history since then. I ended up working, before I retired, I ended up working for AT&T for 18 years on their wireless network, so yeah, so that I think was probably one way of enriching my life. The other is I've made a lot of friends over the years in the hobby, and a lot of those go back to when I was a teenager. So those two things are probably how DXing has enriched my life.
What has been your best or perhaps your most memorable catch on AMDX?
Most memorable, not so much a catch, but a series of catches. Ever since I started recording with the SDR overnight, I've discovered that maybe 3 or 4 times a year there's a really bizarre opening to the stations to the far east of the U.S. or Canada, well, mostly the U.S. I hear some amazing stations when these openings occur, which are like maybe a couple of hours in the middle of the night when I normally wouldn't have bothered listening in midweek. There's the skip that opens up to some part of the country where I've heard stuff like WFNY, which is on 1440 in Gloverstown, New York. I didn't even know the station existed until I heard it. And with some of the others, WKAM, Goshen, Indiana on 1460, WHKY, Hickory, North Carolina on 1290.
That one gets out so well.
Yeah, well, I heard, I have a station in Montana and a station in Pendleton, Oregon that are on that frequency. This totally obliterates the channel normally, but for some reason the Portland station or the Pendleton station was gone, and so I in the background underneath KGVO Missoula, Montana was very dominant, but there's something in the background that I couldn't quite make out. I sent it out to the IRCA email list and one other and said, hey, can anybody make anything out of this? And some guy in Scandinavia said, yeah, it's WHKY, Hickory, North Carolina. And you're kidding me. I mean, the last time I heard North Carolina was about 1967, so that was a real thrill.
That station has followed me everywhere I DX. Of course, it's mostly been the Carolinas and now here in Louisiana, but everywhere I go, I tune to 1290, there's WHKY. It keeps following me. I can't get rid of it. So to have it up in the Seattle area, that's just, that makes me laugh because it's following now to you as well. That's awesome. What's your white whale? The one that you've tried to get? It could be a state, it could be a country, it could be a station, but you're one you've tried so hard to get and you just haven't been able to get him in the logbook.
Actually, up until a few days ago, it was a station real close to me. You would think I'd have no trouble hearing it, but it eluded me for decades. It was CFNI in Fort Hardy, British Columbia, on the northern tip of Vancouver Island, so it's like maybe a couple hundred miles from here. But I never heard it until last Sunday, and I managed to get the opening announcement for the news and send it to the station, and they said, yeah, that's us. So that was a station that had eluded me for a long time. It's my last British Columbia station.
It's amazing how some of those ones are a little closer in, right? We think exotic, but I recently pulled the list to see what I was missing in Louisiana here, and there's about 16 stations left, but all 16 of them I've looked and looked and looked now every night since then, and in the mornings as well. Nothing. Those are going to be hard to add those to the log, I have a feeling. And they're all not too far away. If you could go anywhere in the world right now to DX, where would it be?
That's a real good question. I fantasize about various places. My first spot would be somewhere in the South Pacific. Because depending, if you're on an island in the South Pacific, depending on where you point the antenna, you can either get Asia or Australia or Africa. Well, I mean, I don't know about Africa, but certainly South America. In New Zealand, DXers hear that pretty well. I've always kind of wondered about some place like Perth, Australia, which is like perched on the western shore of that country, and so you have nothing but ocean between you and Africa and South Asia, and that would be kind of an interesting place to DX from, I think.
I've thought a lot about your neck of the woods, actually. Pacific Northwest. I did a trip 3 years ago to Seattle. This was before I was really into SDRs yet, and definitely before I started bringing an SDR with me on my trips, which I do now every time with that little portable loop. But I remember I was sitting in the rental car that we had, just kind of dialing around in the daytime going, man, I would love to spend some time DXing right now. And now, if I would go back, I'm going to do that, right? Bringing the loop, bringing the SDR, recording everything, and getting all that. But that was always an area that something about being up in your neck of the woods, up in the corner up there, what you guys were able to hear just blew my mind. And I was always a little jealous of people like you and Patrick Martin and some of the others that were up there just hearing outstanding, Gary, hearing just outstanding stuff. Now Paul up in Alaska, what he's hearing. Definitely something that I would love to experience. We talked about our first radios and how we both still have ours. What's a radio that you've had that you no longer have that maybe you wish you still did?
Yeah, that was... The one that comes to mind first is the Raycal RA-17, which was... It was an incredibly well-built radio. It was an early adaptation of the Wadley loop, which was used in like the Asus FRG-7 and a couple other radios in the 70s or so, but 70s and 80s. But this was like a 1960s rack-mounted radio, big, huge thing, about, well deserving of the term boat anchor. It had most of the radio dial. It's kind of hard to describe. It was like printed on 35 millimeter film, which you when you turn the knob, it had these gears that moved the not only moved the capacitors, but moved the frequency display that's printed on film on these reels that move back and forth to display the frequency. So that was kind of a cool radio in its time.
What's a radio or maybe an antenna even that you have either never had or never got a chance to use, but you wish you had? I know you've had a chance to use a lot of stuff, a lot of different antennas in those DX editions, so there can't be a whole lot left.
Yeah. The one I would like would be it's commercial or military grade antenna, Woolen Weber array, which is there's like one up in the Queen Charlotte Islands, or it's now known as Haida in the British Columbia. I was up there once several years ago, and they have one up there that the Canadian military operates. But I mean, it's like they nicknamed it the elephant cage, and if you could see it, you'd understand why, because it's like this big steel structure with must be some sort of antenna element every 10 degrees or so, maybe. I'm guessing, but
oh, wow.
Apparently they just operate it by switching back and forth. Phase. I don't know if they phase the different antenna elements, or if they switch between them or what. But it's huge, and it's probably pretty sensitive. Yeah, you need some serious real estate to build one of those.
When you sit down to do a DX session, whether it's to live DX or if you're reviewing your SDR recordings, what's the first thing you do when you start to DX? Do you have a frequency you go to? Do you have certain places you look to kind of see how the conditions are looking, or what do you do?
Yeah, I kind of try and screen out. I try and get a quick look at the band for that particular night. Particularly if I'm DXing at home, there's no point in spending a lot of time listening to the files if it's just another mediocre night or just another average night. So I tend to check for certain frequencies at certain times that stuff is likely to come in. Like 1570 is mostly open cross country for me. There's a Punjabi station in California that's kind of a source of interference, but I can get around them lots of times and hear stuff from the Midwest. And some of the stations near me have a habit of fading out in the middle of the night, 3 or 4 in the morning, my time. Yes, there's like stations on 1460 and 1280 in in Yakima, Washington, for example, that sometimes they just sort of get weak or disappear, probably because they're so close that the short skip, about 120 miles from me, that they just kind of, the skip doesn't work very well at that hour of the day, night or something, but sometimes I'll be able to hear something from the Midwest on those frequencies. And so I check certain frequencies that I'm interested in. 640 can be a good one to check, to see how Cuba's coming in underneath, or KFI. And so I check certain frequencies. I also like to check my local frequencies that to see if any of my locals went off the air that night.
Mm-hmm.
And then just kind of tune around a little bit to get kind of a feel for how the band seems to be behaving.
Whenever I go, I guess twice a year now, out to California for my day job. The company I work for is based in in Southern California. So I go out there, bring my equipment with me. It's weird how the very first thing I do when I get all my gear set up and I'm in the hotel room is I tune to 1000 to hear what used to be Como, now KPNW. But that's the first thing I always do is I can kind of know how the conditions are there in the hotel room by how well Seattle's coming in. So it's interesting. I've always found it interesting how we all kind of have our landmarks that we use to kind of get acclimated. And I also have a theory. I don't know if it's right or not, but like on the ham bands, you'll start on 40 meters right after sunset. It's kind of short, right? You're hearing states near you, and then overnight time it starts to get longer and longer and longer. I feel like, because it happens on 80 meters, it happens on 160, so it has to happen on AM as well, right? So I think there's maybe an element of that, like what you were talking about with some of those closer in stations kind of disappearing a little bit, and you start to hear further out. I feel like that's kind of what we're experiencing, is that band getting longer and longer and longer. I know here in Louisiana, I start a certain time of night, I can start to really hear Colombia, or Venezuelans or something like that down in South America a little bit better than I can earlier or even later in the morning. So always an interesting thing. The propagation fascinates me. So what's a DX tool that you just cannot live without?
But I would have to say right now the combination of the Perseus and Jaguar software is pretty impressive, and that's what I couldn't live without right now.
Isn't it great?
Yeah.
I tell everyone, it's the only reason I bought a Perseus. If it wasn't for Jaguar, I probably would just be using my AirSpy, maybe the RSP DX. Maybe I did get the ELAD FDMS3, so maybe I would still be using that too. But that Jaguar software completely changed how I DX, to the point where even now, like during the FM season, when I'm doing FM DX, it's not as enjoyable because I don't have a Jaguar equivalent. I still enjoy it, but I wish that I had a Jaguar equivalent for FM DX. It's that revolutionary, folks. If you have a Perseus and you're not AM DXing through Jaguar, you got to start because it's amazing. I think that for me, probably that or the phaser, the phasing units or the Vactrals, those tools that I can use to fine tune that null or to be able to get around noise or whatever. Those are big for me. We've got two more questions here. What's the most recent thing that you learned about DXing?
I'd say probably the most recent thing though would be that there are times of the night when certain stations become enhanced. Like I'm finding that more and more stations are coming really well about an hour to a half hour before their local sunrise for some reason. And it's kind of unpredictable, but it happens sometimes. I've noticed some stations just kind of fade up out of the noise and interference and then kind of dive right down after about 15 minutes around that time period. That's something I'm digging into a little bit more to try and understand what's going on there, because I haven't heard too much about that.
If you could go back in time and find yourself as a new DXer and give yourself one piece of advice, what would it be?
Oh, I don't know, because the hobby has changed a lot in terms of how I approach it since I was a teenager. So it's kind of hard to. I wouldn't have had SDR receivers then, and I wouldn't have had computers to DX with then, so it'd be hard to say. They've become such a mainstay of my AM DXing hobby now that the way we went about it in the old days is just totally different from the way it is now. So I don't know how any advice would apply.
It was hunt and peck back then, right?
Yeah, pretty much so, yeah.
It was just luck of the draw. It was either you knew what you were going after and you hoped to hear it, or you just stumbled across that lucky thing, right?
Yeah.
So is there anything that you learned in those early days that you're applying to your SDR world now?
I think like most of us, you learn over time to be able to pick stuff out of the noise and interference and actually hear an ID that a normal person would just write off as static or whatever term they want to use. But it's kind of remarkable how we're able to hear IDs out of something that's just barely there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just something. It's something that you just kind of learn to appreciate over time and get good at doing.
And for folks who want to join the IRCA, remind them where they can go.
The website is ircaonline.org.
And I know there's a join link, right, for them to be able to get all the information about becoming a member?
Mm-hmm. Join link, and there's all sorts of stuff on the website, publications and things, reprints of past articles, the TIS list and the Mexican list, and various other things you can download for free.
A huge thank you to Bruce Portzer for spending that time with us, over 3 years ago now? I guess there's no time like the present, right? It was a really great opportunity to speak with him and be able to talk shop with him, talk DX. Anytime I get an opportunity to talk to a DXer about their experience, especially someone who spent as much time behind the dial as Bruce has, talk about their experiences, about their knowledge, I'm going to jump at that chance, right? Some of the things that we learned from Bruce today or talked about with Bruce that kind of stuck with me, things about that sunrise period for Trans-Pacific DX, talking about those overnight periods, how things can kind of fade in at different times of the night. And the big one for me, and this actually came to fruition a year or two later for me when I was able to get Argentina and Paraguay, was utilizing that little right there before sunrise boost that a lot of stations get as the gray line approaches, to be able to get those stations. Something I'd known about and I'd talked about with my father for many years, and we talked about that gray line enhancement that comes around, not even when it's directly over you, but when it's nearing that station that you're targeting. But hearing him talk about it reinvigorated that for me, and it was something I was able to actually use to success. So again, thank you to Bruce. And if you have not yet done so, please make sure you go to IRCAonline.org and become a member of the International Radio Club of America. The clubs are there to support the hobby, support the community, provide very, very important information for all of us on what's being heard, format changes, call letter changes, construction permits the stations are doing, who's on air, who's off air, networks for sports, international stuff like the Mexican log that the IRCA does, just all this extremely important DX information that you're not going to get anywhere else, right? The clubs are providing these services that no one else really is going to have, right? So make sure that you support the clubs, that support the community and support the hobby. Go to IRCAonline.org today and become a member of the IRCA. And I encourage all of you, submit your logging, submit your receptions to the columns there that do the logging of the DX Monitor member bulletin. That way you can share what you're hearing with the rest of the club. Thank you again, Bruce, and we appreciate your time, and glad we were able to finally get this out here onto the podcast. And that's going to do it for this edition of the DX Central from the Static Podcast. We hope this has been enjoyable for you. A few reminders for you. Be sure to check out DX Central Live, our Friday night shows, every Friday night at 0045 UTC. That's 1845 Central Time. We bring you live DX challenges, tips, tricks, shout-outs, and more. So make sure you tune in at dxcentrallive.com. Also, we want to invite you, if you have not yet done so already, to become a patron of DX Central. And there's some goodies in it for you. If you sign up, you get access to exclusive videos, live streams, and more that we're building that catalog up right now and getting ready to unleash some of that onto the world. And we'll be doing exclusive live streams, including for some patrons, the ability to join in on a Zoom call and DX alongside with us live, right? We also have early access to videos, early access to these podcasts, and a whole lot more. So make sure you go to patreon.com/DX Central. If you feel so inclined, we would definitely be very, very grateful. It's something that already we've seen a tremendous response from the community for, and we are humbly grateful for all that support. Also, if you haven't done so already, make sure you subscribe, like, follow, whatever your podcast provider does on podcasts. Make sure you do that with this podcast, so when new episodes are presented, you'll be notified. We do new episodes every week when we bring our DX Central Live audio to the podcast. We're also doing regular episodes as well, DX 101, History of Radio, these DXC one-on-one interviews. And don't forget, you can also give us your stories as well. We want to hear from you. So you can submit your DX stories to stories at fromthestatic.net. Let us know your origin story. How did you get started in DX? How did you learn about this crazy little hobby? What are some of the favorite radios you've had? Some of those questions that we were asking Bruce. What were the best radios you had? What's the radio that you never had that you wish you did? What's your favorite antenna, favorite catch, things like that? Tell us your stories. Send those in to stories@fromthestatic.net. We'll gather all those up, and we'll every once in a while put an episode out of DX stories from you guys. Again, thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate you tuning in. 73 and DX.
This has been the DX Central from the Static Podcast. If you are interested in sponsoring this podcast, let us know by emailing sponsors@fromthestatic.net. If you have a story to share for our Stories from the Static series, send those to our email address, stories@fromthestatic.net. Be sure to join us for our live DX live stream every Friday night at 23:45 UTC, 18:45 Central Time on our YouTube channel or at dxcentrallive.com.
The DX Central from the Static podcast is copyright 2025, Lloyd Van Horn, DX Central. All rights reserved. No portion of this podcast may be rebroadcast or reused without the express written authorization of Lloyd Van Horn and DX Central. Be sure to follow or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, as new episodes will be posted regularly. Join us next time for the DX Central from the Static podcast.